So, I got this fun toy in here from NUX, and it has me asking, do I even need an amplifier anymore? Alright, Dan here, Max SPL Videos, and what is this thing? Well, I've recently become a NUX dealer, and I've started bringing in, the odd item from them, and this really caught my eye in the product catalog. The MG-300 is a multi-effects processor slash amp modeler slash recording interface, right? It wears a lot of hats, and it does it all pretty darn well. And it's making me question more and more if this isn't the way of the future, right? I love my amplifiers. Don't get me wrong. There's something about being in the room with a big, loud cranked amp. You hit that power cord and you feel the walls shake. But I don't remember the last time I actually got to do that. The last live gig I went to, I had my amp set to 4 out of 10, and the sound guy asked me to turn down. That's just where we're at. And as most people know, with a nice tube amp, they don't really open up until you get them a little bit cranked. So enter the MG-300, as well as there's a swath of great processors out there, but a lot of those cost an arm and a leg or don't sound that great, right? That for a long time was their two choices. Either go incredibly high-end or cheap out and get something that's just not quite going to cut it. I'm amazed at what NUX has managed to do here. So let's look at a few situations where I normally would bring an amp to and why I might consider using something like this. Rehearsal slash practice. Okay, so practicing at home, this is a bit of a no-brainer. Yes, I love my amps. I live in a condo, right? My amps don't have headphone jacks, and buying an amp that has a headphone jack means, well, I just have to buy another amp for the sake of plugging headphones in. So why not use something like this? Bang, right? It's got a looper as well as the built-in drum tracks and things like that to just really make just general practice easier. So if you're a beginner, if you're a brand new player, this thing will really help you get locked in. You'll have a ton of fun using it. And it's also surprisingly easy to use for the amount of stuff that it can do, which for a beginner, that's very important. And for a lot of experienced players, right? I know guys who've been playing for 50 years that hate technology because they want to just be able to plug their amp in, hit the on switch, and it's going to sound good no matter what. This almost gets to that point, right? The editor on the USB, it's so easy. It's ridiculously easy to change out amps, adjust settings, stuff like that. On-board editing is a little bit more annoying because even though we've got a nice color LCD screen there that does make it quite a bit easier than units of old that just have a number there, it's still not as good as using a computer. It's just so much easier to use your computer. Now, in a rehearsal situation where I've got to haul my amp every time, if we've got a PA there, I bring one cable, and I bring this thing, well, 2 cables for plugging your guitar in, obviously, but 1 cable from this out to the mixer board. Done. That's my setup. Sweet. Yeah, and it sounds pretty darn convincing. It's not the case of, modelers of old where you start playing with a band and it's just something about it. The frequencies just seem to vanish amongst everything. This gets some very realistic amp tones. So another situation where I might bring my amp, a live gig. Now, depending on the gig, I still may bring my amplifier and pedal board because I love it, right? We all have our sound. Now, if you don't have your sound yet, right, you're starting out, you're new, you don't know what amp you want, you got a gig coming up, something like this will actually work wonders because then you get to try a whole bunch of different amplifier types, right? You find yourself always using the Vox setting, right, or whatever they happen to call the Vox in this thing. Well, then maybe an AC15 or AC30 is in your future. If you're always using the Plexi setting, or if you're always using the dual rectifier setting, right? It narrows down your sound. But what if you don't need your sound? What if you're in a cover band? Well, you just go in. There's a whole bunch of user presets available. You can make a preset for just about every song that you have on your set list, where you just flick to the next song on here. You've got all your settings for it. You can make an 80s metal tone and have the next click over be a John Mayer kind of clean, about to break up sound. And surprisingly, this thing responds to volume knobs and to variations in picking intensity, all that stuff very well. It's very convincing. I'm quite impressed. Now, the last scenario that I would often bring an amp to is recording. Now, that's where things get a little more interesting with this. This thing, when it comes to recording, you can use the direct out, straight in. You can use the USB, straight in. And there's some options that kind of do both, where if you have the USB going and you record out of the output, you can set the USB to be a clean output and just record sort of the ding-ding-ding of your guitar. That's really cool for a variety of reasons. The big one being, well, what if you own some good amp software, but you got a crappy computer? The latency on that gets in the way. It can mess with your playing. If I can't get my computer down to, at the highest, about 64 samples, I start to hear my pick attack after I picked, and it drives me nuts, and it messes with my playing. I just don't like it. I don't have that if I direct in with this, so then I can hear the amp sound coming from here, and then I get a clean recorded signal. That's awesome. Other things in terms of routing, and this goes to both the live and to the recording side of things, they've thought ahead a lot on the output side of this, where you can do direct in, right? You go into a recording interface, just cable right in. It works. Awesome. If you already have an amplifier, say you've got a Fender amp that has an effects loop. I'm trying to play a metal song. The Fender amps, I love them. They're not built for that usually. You plug this thing on the combo setting, which is designed to go into the effects loop return on an amplifier. And now you're using the power amp section of your amp and skipping the preamp. This replaces it, but knows, hey, I'm going through a speaker, so it skips some of the extra processing, lets you go through your speaker. Now you're getting, that nice tube power amp to round a lot of those edges off. So if you're recording and you find that, it's just a little too digital for me, try that. Might work wonders. If you're playing live and you want a multitude of sounds, you can get into some 4 cable method stuff to have this thing in the effects loop and only have it turn on when you want it on, things like that. It's got a lot of possibilities for such a tiny box. One thing to note on units like this, it does sound like a guitar going through an amp, going through a speaker, going through a microphone. If you're wanting the sound of this going through an amplifier, run this thing into the effects loop of an amp and get a speaker moving. That's your best bet. But if you can get past, it sounds like it's going through a mic, which it does have a bunch of microphone options internally, which is awesome. That works as well. Now, downsides of it, there aren't many. It's not the most robustly built piece of equipment I've ever used. It's probably not going to last as long as some of the more expensive pedals and whatnot that I own. It does, out of the box, you need to calibrate the pedal. That's fine, right? You do it. It takes all of about 10 seconds. But if you plug it in, why isn't my wah working? That's why. And it's a little bit annoying, but I think it had to do with the firmware update. It's a digital piece of equipment that needs a couple seconds to set up. I'm not going to fault it for that, but it deserves mentioning. Now, I think they nailed the models and all the sounds and stuff in here. I've heard some are a little disappointed with some of the reverb and delay trails and things like that. I think they sound great. That, your mileage may vary. I think the amp models in this is where they really nailed it. Instead of doing, say, 120 amps, they did 30-ish. I think it's like 25 or something like that. And did them all really well. I prefer that, right? Not only does that get rid of a bit of the redundancy of I have 5 amps that sound almost alike, but one's from 1958 and one's from 1962. No, it's just got all of your biggies plus a couple other fun ones. And they all sound great. They've all got a good amount of variety of sounds you can get out of them, but you don't run into that analysis paralysis of I've got 120 amps. What am I supposed to use for this song? Yeah, all in all, I think NUX has nailed it. I think as much as I love analog equipment, as much as I love the sound of a cranked amp, equipment like this is really making me question, is it necessary 9 times out of 10? Is it more fun? I'd say yeah, like especially if you know the sound you're after, right? If you have a sound you're looking for, having an amp and having a pedal collection, it's a blast. Don't get me wrong. But if you don't have those things yet, or if you're finding, like I said, if you're finding yourself going to gigs and you're having to turn the thing down so much that it's just, why do I even have this massive thing? Something like this might be just what you need. Now, I would be keeping one of these for myself if it wasn't for the fact that NUX is having their MG-300 coming out in about a month and a half from the time of recording this. And after hearing this, that thing has me intrigued. So stay tuned for that. I'll likely be picking one of those up for myself, and I'll give you a full rundown on that as well. But yeah, like, subscribe, all that stuff. If you want some more info on this, leave a comment, let me know. If you have any questions, let me know. And if you want to see a full review of that MG-300, let me know. I'll talk to you next time.